Hello guys, welcome to Phoenix What If. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto became the Blood Moon Shinigami and fell in love with Retsu Unohana? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Echo of a Setting Sun. The end did not come with a bang, but with a quiet, ragged exhalation of breath. The taste of blood and ozone was a film on Naruto Uzumaki's tongue. Below him, the valley, once a testament to giants, was now a cratered hellscape of gouged earth and shattered rock, slick with the gore of a deity. The moon, scarred and fractured by their battle, bled a weak, watery light over the devastation. He had won. The fourth great ninja war was over. Kagaya was sealed. He lay propped against a slab of stone, the last dregs of Kurama's chakra fading warmth in the hollow of his chest. The great fox was gone. His energy expended in the final, desperate attack that had saved everyone. There was a profound silence where the beast's grumpy, rumbling voice had resided for most of his life. It was a loneliness deeper than any he had ever known. Sasuke was nearby, a dark shape against the gray dawn, alive. That was enough. It had to be. Naruto's own life force, the vibrant, overwhelming energy of an Uzumaki, was leaking from him like water from a sieve. His senses were fading. The sharp scent of rain on dry earth, the cool morning air, the distant cry of a bird heralding a sunrise it shouldn't have been able to see, it was all blurring, becoming a single, muted note. He closed his eyes, a flicker of a smile on his lips. He had done it. He had kept his promise. He was Hokage in all but name, the hero of the world. And now, he was dying. It was a fair trade. He felt a final, gentle pull, like a tide going out. Peace settled in his bones. This was it, the end. But the darkness that came wasn't empty. It was cold, a deep, abyssal cold that sank into the very concept of him. He was aware, a point of consciousness adrift in an infinite, starless night. The peace of moments before was ripped away, replaced by a terrifying, pulling sensation. Something was dragging his soul, not toward a peaceful afterlife, but sideways, through the fabric of what was supposed to be. Then came the light, a searing, violent crimson. It wasn't the warm light of the sun or the soft glow of a lantern. It was the color of a blood sacrifice under a full moon, the light of a cosmic wound. It burned through him, not with heat, but with a dreadful, ancient purpose. He felt his very essence, his soul, his memories, the ghost of Kurama's power, the potent lifeblood of his clan, being unraveled and rewoven. It was agony. He was being reforged, hammered into a new shape on an anvil of impossible gravity. The process felt like it lasted an eternity and an instant. He heard a sound, not with ears, but with his entire being, the shattering of a celestial mirror. Then, silence, and the feeling of solid ground. Naruto's eyes snapped open. He was lying on his back, staring up at a sky that was not his own. It was a perpetual twilight, a soft, unchanging gray that held no sun, no clouds, just an endless expanse of melancholic light. He sat up, the movement fluid, effortless. There was no pain, no exhaustion. He looked at his hands. They were his hands, but they felt different, stronger. He wasn't breathing. He didn't need to. A quiet, immense power hummed within him, a reservoir so vast it made his previous abilities feel like a flickering candle against a supernova. It was a calm, steady ocean where before there had been a raging, chaotic river. He pushed himself to his feet. He wore a simple, sleeveless black shihakusho, the fabric feeling alien against his skin, and sturdy straw sandals. The garish orange of his past life was gone. He felt clean, unburdened. Yet, every memory, every friend, every loss, was still perfectly preserved in his mind, not as a painful weight, but as a finished chapter in a book that had been closed. He was in an alley, the ground a packed, gray dust. The buildings around him were shanties, cobbled together from scrap wood, rusted metal, and decaying planks. The air was thick with the scent of poverty, despair, and a strange, spiritual stillness. He could feel the people nearby, not with chakra senses, but with something more fundamental. They were like dim, flickering embers, their life forces weak, their wills eroded by time and hopelessness. This was the Rukongai, the sprawling city of the dead, though he did not yet know its name. He walked out of the alley and onto a wider, dusty street. Souls in various states of dress and listlessness wandered about or sat slumped against walls. They paid him no mind. He was just another new arrival. But as he walked, a subtle change occurred. The oppressive despair in the air seemed to thin around him. The very dust at his feet seemed to settle. His presence, his sheer spiritual density, was a gravitational force, imposing a quiet, unconscious order on the chaos. He didn't seek to rule or command. He just existed. And in this place of decay, his stable, vibrant existence was a revolutionary act. He found an abandoned, half-collapsed hut at the edge of the 78th district, Zaraki. A place known for its violence and destitution. He didn't need to eat or sleep, but the habit of having a place to call his own was ingrained. He sat in the doorway, watching the endless twilight, and for the first time since his rebirth, he assessed his new reality. He could feel the world, this soul society, as a living entity. He could feel the structured, pulsing heart of a city far in the distance, the Seraite, bristling with thousands of powerful, sword-bearing souls. He could feel the restless, hungry void of another world, a desert of endless night filled with monstrous, hollow things, Hueco Mundo. And he could feel the faint, distant echo of his home, the world of the living, a place now beyond his reach. He was an anomaly, a ghost with the power of a god. He was no longer a ninja, no longer a Jinchuriki. The crimson light, the blood moon, the fusion of his immense life force with a tailed beast's soul at the exact moment of death, it had made him something new. A Shinigami, yes, but not like the ones he could sense in the distant city. Their power was channeled, structured, contained within their blades. His was primal, it was his very being. He was a force of nature given a human form. The Shinigami of the blood moon. Weeks turned into a month. He did not preach or lead. He simply was. When gangs of desperate souls tried to claim his small territory, he didn't meet them with violence. He met them with an overwhelming, placid pressure that brought them to their knees, their bloodlust and anger dissolving into a profound, humbling awe. When a child's soul was fading, he placed a hand on their head and let a sliver of his energy flow into them, reinforcing their form, bringing a blush of spiritual color back to their pale cheeks. He used his power to purify a stagnant well, the water now running clean and fortifying. The district began to change. The area around his hut became an oasis of calm. The ambient spiritual energy, which he now understood was called Reishi, was richer here. The souls living nearby felt stronger, calmer. Fights became less frequent. The ever-present despair began to recede. They started calling him a name, whispered at first, then spoken with reverence. The Akatsuki no Shinigami, the blood moon god of death. He wasn't a god and he didn't want to be. He was just Naruto. But he didn't correct them. He understood that they needed a symbol. He had been one before. His quiet work, however, did not go unnoticed. A power signature as massive and as stable as his was like a lighthouse in a storm, and the keepers of the soul sock. Ayati had finally turned their gaze upon it. Captain Retsu Unohana of the 4th Division moved with a grace that belied the grim nature of her task. Her long, black hair was bound in its customary thick braid down her front. And her expression was one of serene, professional concern. Beside her, her lieutenant, Azane Katetsu, a tall and earnest woman, carried a medical kit, though they both knew it was unlikely to be of any use. They were in the 80th district, Kusajishi, a place of near-total lawlessness, just beyond the district Naruto had claimed. They were not here for him. They were hunting a ghost. It is the third incident this month, Captain, Azane said, her voice tight with worry. They stood at the edge of a clearing where a small, thriving community of souls had existed just yesterday. Now, there was nothing. Not rubble, not bodies, not even the faint spiritual residue that always lingered after a soul's passing. There was only a chilling, absolute absence. Indeed, Lieutenant, Unohana replied. Her voice as soft as silk. She knelt, her gloved fingers hovering just above the ground. A normal Shinigami would feel nothing. But Unohana was not a normal Shinigami. Beneath her gentle exterior, a monster of perception and power slumbered. She closed her eyes and extended her senses, not her medical Kaido, but something older, sharper. She felt it. A scar, a wound in the very fabric of reality, where something had not been killed or consumed, but erased. As if it had never been. The concept of the souls that had lived here had been surgically excised from the world. The silence it left behind was more terrifying than any scream. The reports called it evaporation, Azane murmured, shivering despite the unchanging temperature. This feels more like a hole. An accurate assessment, Unohana said, rising. Her serene smile was back in place, but her eyes, dark and ancient, held a cold, analytical light. This was a thread of a classification she had never encountered. It was clean, it was precise, and it was spreading. As she contemplated the nature of this existential predator, another sensation prickled at the edge of her awareness. It was a feeling she had been monitoring for weeks. A colossal spike of spiritual pressure that had appeared in the neighboring 78th district. Unlike a hollow, which was a chaotic torrent of hunger, or a powerful Shinigami, whose Retsu was controlled and defined, this was something else entirely. It was vast, calm, and constant, like a star that had decided to take up residence in the Rukongai. At first, Central 46 had dismissed it as a sensor malfunction. But it hadn't faded, it had stabilized. And now, reports were trickling in of an entire district becoming orderly, of a mysterious figure performing what sounded like miracles. Ordinarily, she would have left such a matter to the other divisions. But this power, it sang to a part of her she kept buried deep. It was the music of a truly monumental soul, melody of power so profound it made the Retsu of most captains sound like children playing tin whistles. She had not felt anything even remotely its equal since, well, for a very, very long time. Oh, our investigation here is complete for now, Lieutenant, Unohana said, her decision made. There is another anomaly I wish to observe personally. In the 78th district. Azane blinked, surprised. Captain, the reports on that are being handled by the 11th and 2nd divisions. They suspect a rogue captain-class entity. And I suspect their methods may be insufficient for a proper evaluation, Unohana replied, her smile never wavering. This is a medical concern as much as a military one. A power of that magnitude could be a sickness, a cancer upon the balance of the soul society. Or, she added, her voice dropping a fraction, it could be a cure. We must understand it before we attempt to excise it. Azane, as always, bowed to her captain's wisdom. As you command. As they walked, Unohana let her senses drift toward the distant star of power. It felt like sun on her skin. It was warm, vital, and beneath its immense calm, it held a core of something wild and untamable, a joyful ferocity that resonated with the old blood in her veins. She hadn't felt this thrill of curiosity, this deep, primal interest in another being, in centuries. Whoever this person was, they were not a simple rogue. They were a fundamental shift in the world as she knew it. The transition from the 80th district to the 78th was jarring. The air of desperate, violent tension gave way to a palpable sense of peace. The very reishi in the atmosphere felt thicker, healthier. Souls on the street, though still poor, walked with a purpose that was absent just a few blocks away. They looked at Unohana and Azane not with fear, but with a guarded caution. As if protecting something precious. Her destination was the epicenter of the power, a small, humble hut. And sitting in the doorway, silhouetted against the dim light, was a man. He had sun-bright blonde hair and eyes the color of a clear summer sky. On his cheeks were faint, whisker-like marks. He was not looking at them, but he was undeniably aware of their approach. He radiated an aura of such profound stillness that it was more intimidating than any overt display of power could ever be. Unohana came to a stop a respectful distance away. Azane Veli placed a hand on the hilt of her Zanpakuto, her training screaming at her that the man before them was more dangerous than anything she had ever encountered. Unohana placed a gentle hand on her lieutenant's arm. It is all right, Azane. Quote. The man's gaze finally shifted to them. His blue eyes were not hostile. They were ancient, filled with a weariness that didn't belong on his young face, yet they also held a clear, unwavering resolve. He looked at Azane, his gaze dismissive but not unkind, the look one gives a nervous child. Then his eyes met Unohana's. And the world stopped. For Unohana, it was like looking into the heart of a nebula. She saw the immense, Controlled power, yes. But beneath it, she saw a history of unimaginable conflict, of loss, of a burden carried with a strength that bordered on the divine. And deeper still, she saw a core of brilliant, unwavering empathy. It was a paradox, a being of celestial might with the heart of a simple, kind man. For Naruto, it was like looking at a perfectly calm sea that he knew, with absolute certainty, concealed a leviathan. Her smile was a work of art, a masterpiece of deception crafted over 1,000 years. It did not reach her eyes. Her eyes, dark and lovely, held a bottomless abyss. He could feel the monster she kept chained within her, a creature of pure, unadulterated bloodlust and the singular joy of the blade. It was a power that dwarfed Kenpachi's Iraqi's, a sleeping volcano of slaughter. And she had it under perfect, placid control. He had known men and women who were monsters. He had fought them, befriended them, and contained one within himself. He was not afraid. He was, for the first time in this new world, utterly fascinated. Captain Retsu Unohana of the 4th Division, she said, her voice a melodic chime. She gave a slight, formal bow. We are here investigating a series of disturbances in the Rukongai. Naruto didn't stand. He simply inclined his head, a gesture of acknowledgement between equals, not one of deference. You're a long way from whatever hospital you run. His voice was calm, a low tenor that vibrated with his latent power. There's nothing here for a healer. Perhaps, Unohana replied, her smile unwavering. And perhaps the greatest sickness is an imbalance. A power such as yours, unregistered and unaccounted for, is a profound imbalance. Balance is about more than just rules and registers, Captain. Naruto countered, his gaze unwavering. Sometimes, a heavy weight is needed on one side of the scales to keep them from tipping over completely. Before Unohana could reply, the very air ripped open. A screech that tore at the soul echoed through the district. Not 100 feet away, a garganta, a black rift of spatial distortion, gaped open. From its depths crawled a massive hollow. It was a grotesque thing, 20 feet tall, a mismatched collection of limbs and mouths, its defining feature a bone-white mask with a single, vacuous eye. It was a Jillian-class Manos, mindless and driven by an insatiable hunger. The souls on the street screamed and scattered, their fragile peace shattered. Azane's hand flew to her Zanpakuto. Hollow, in the 78th. Captain. 2OT. Her Shinigami from Unohana's escort appeared, their blades drawn. We'll handle it, Lieutenant. The two advanced, their movements practiced. Hashire. Benihime. One of them might have shouted, releasing his Shikai. A spray of generic energy blasts would have flown. But this was not their story. This was Naruto's. He sighed, a sound of pure annoyance, like a man whose nap had been interrupted. He rose to his feet in a single, fluid motion. This is new. They don't usually come this deep. Unohana watched him, her full attention fixed on the blond man, not the monster. The hollow was a known quantity. He was not. The two 4th Division members launched their attack. One used a binding Kido, a weak Bakudo number 4, Hanawa, which the hollow shattered with a casual swipe of a clawed arm. The other lunged, his blade aimed at its leg, only to be swatted aside, crashing into the side of a building with a sickening crunch. Pathetic, Naruto murmured, not with cruelty, but with simple observation. Azane moved to step forward, to release her own Shikai, but Unohana's hand on her shoulder stopped her cold. Wait, Naruto took a single step forward. He didn't draw a weapon. He didn't raise his voice. He simply lifted his right hand, palm open, toward the rampaging hollow. The creature, which had been about to devour the fallen Shinigami, froze. Its single, massive eye swiveled to fix on Naruto. A low growl rumbled in its many throats. It sensed his power, a feast beyond its wildest dreams. With a roar, it abandoned its previous target and charged at him. Naruto didn't move. A soft, crimson light, the color of a blood moon, began to emanate from his body, pooling in his open palm. It was not the violent, jagged Retsu of a Shinigami. It was something else. It was serene, yet absolute. He hollow was 10 feet away when the light pulsed. It wasn't an attack. It wasn't a blast of energy. It was a wave of empathy. Naruto reached out with his very soul and touched the core of the hollow. He didn't see a monster. He saw the cluster of lost, terrified souls it was made of, their individual identities subsumed into a single, gnawing hunger. He felt their pain, their loneliness, their eternal, desperate craving for something to make them whole again. And he offered them peace. The crimson light washed over the hollow. The creature skidded to a halt, its monstrous form trembling. A sound of confusion, a low, guttural whine, escaped its mask. The raw killing intent that had saturated the air vanished, replaced by a profound, sorrowful quiet. The hollow looked down at its own clawed hands, then back at Naruto. The mask, the symbol of its forsaken identity, began to crack. Not from force, but as if the pain that held it together was dissolving. A single, black tear trickled from the corner of its eye. Then, with a sound like sighing wind, the hollow disintegrated. It didn't explode. It didn't burn. It simply unraveled, its constituent spiritual particles dissolving into the air, purified and returned to the cycle. The air was left clean, the only evidence of the monster's existence the cracks in the street where it had stood. Silence. The entire district was staring. The souls who had fled peeked from alleys. Azane Katetsu's jaw was slack, her mind unable to process what she had just witnessed. Ameno's class hollow, pacified, purified without a single stroke of a Zanpakuto. It was impossible. It defied every doctrine of the Gote 13, every law of spiritual combat. Naruto lowered his hand, the crimson light fading back into him. He glanced at the fallen Shinigami, who was groaning and stirring. Then turned his gaze back to Unohana. Her serene smile was gone. In its place was an expression of pure, unadulterated fascination. Her dark eyes were wide, sparkling with an intense, predatory light that would have sent any other man running for his life. It was the look of a master swordsman who had just witnessed a technique that redefined the very art of the blade. It was the look of a predator who had just found its equal. Incredible, she breathed, the word a soft prayer of reverence. You didn't destroy it. You absolved it. Its hunger was just a memory of pain, Naruto said simply. His calm returning. It just needed someone to listen. He gave a small, wry smile. Being a monster doesn't mean you have to be monstrous. His eyes met hers again, and in that moment, he knew she understood that statement more than anyone else in this world. He was talking about the hollow, but he was also talking about her. And about himself. Unohana's composed smile slowly returned. But it was different now. It was genuine. It held a warmth that reached her eyes, a shared understanding that transcended words. Uzumaki Naruto, she said, not as a question, but as a statement. She had heard the name whispered by the locals. Until now, it was just a designation. Now, it had a face. And a philosophy. You know my name, he said. It wasn't a surprise. I am a very thorough captain, she replied. It seems the Gote 13 will have much to discuss. Your existence is problematic. Only for people who see problems instead of solutions, Naruto countered easily. He gestured vaguely toward the direction she had come from, the 80th district. You weren't just taking a walk. You were hunting something that leaves holes. Unohana's eyes sharpened. His perception was as formidable as his power. You are very perceptive. I feel things, he said. And I feel a cold, empty wrongness out there. Colder than death. That's a real problem. I'm just a guy sitting in a hut. He crossed his arms, his posture relaxed but his presence immense. Tell your leaders what you saw. Tell them they're pointing their swords in the wrong direction. Unohana held his gaze for a long moment. A silent conversation passing between them. Then, she gave a slow, deliberate nod. I will deliver my report, Uzumaki Naruto. You have my word. She turned, her braids swaying. Azane, retrieve the injured. We are returning to the Seraite. Why yes, Captain. Azane stammered, still reeling. She and the other conscious guard hurried to help their fallen comrade. As she walked away, Unohana glanced back over her shoulder one last time. Naruto was still watching her, his blonde hair a beacon in the perpetual twilight. A star in the Rukongai. A monster who healed. A god who wanted to be left alone. A small, genuine smile touched her lips. This was going to be very interesting indeed. The 1st Division Barracks, headquarters of the Gote 13, was a place of imposing silence. The captain's meeting was a rare and solemn affair. 13 figures stood in 2 rows, a collection of the most powerful souls in existence. At their head, standing before his throne, was the Captain Commander. Genryusai Shigekuni Yamamoto. His ancient, scarred body was a testament to 1,000 years of war, and his eyes, usually closed, were open, regarding Unohana with impatient gravity. Aizen Sosuke stood in his position, his gentle, scholarly smile firmly in place. His mind, however, was racing. Unohana's report was far more detailed and poetic than he had anticipated. He had been aware of the anomaly, of course. He had originally marked it as a potential piece for his plans, a powerful pawn to be manipulated. But this description, pacifying Amanos with empathy, a power that wasn't Kido, wasn't a Zanpakuto ability, wasn't anything cataloged. This was not a pawn. This was a new player. A king from a different game, sitting on a board he had thought was all his own. Quote ellipsis. And its spiritual form was peacefully disassembled, its constituent souls purified without the use of a Kanso ritual, Unohana finished, her voice calm and clinical. The subject, known as Naruto Uzumaki, demonstrated a level of spiritual control and a fundamental power type that is, in my professional opinion, completely unprecedented. A gruff sound came from the towering form of Kenpachi Zaraki, captain of the 11th Division. A wide, bloodthirsty grin split his face. So he's strong, then. Strong enough to make Amanos piss itself in fear and fall apart. Sounds like fun. It was not fear, Captain Zaraki. Unohana corrected gently. It was acceptance. Silence. Yamamoto's voice boomed, rattling the air. An unseated soul with power that rivals a captain. An ability that subverts the very nature of a Shinigami's duty. He has established a territory and is influencing the souls within it. This is a threat to the balance. With respect, Captain Commander, Unohana said, her head bowed. The district he occupies has seen a 90% reduction in violent incidents and a marked increase in spiritual stability. The entity is, for now, a benign influence. Benign, Captain Soi Fan of the 2nd Division interjected. Her voice sharp and cold. He is an unknown, unsanctioned. He operates outside our laws. He is a nail that must be hammered down. The Onmitsukido should handle this. Swiftly and silently, Aizen watched, his expression unchanged, predictable. Soi Fan saw a threat to order. Zaraki saw a fight, but Unohana, she saw something else. And that was the most dangerous variable of all. I disagree, Unohana stated, her voice losing none of its politeness, yet gaining an edge of unyielding steel. Her statement hung in the air, a clear defiance of the hardline approach. To act rashly against a power we do not understand would be foolish. We know nothing of its limits, its origins, or its intent. It is my official recommendation that we continue to observe. I will take personal responsibility for monitoring the subject. Yamamoto stared at her, his ancient eyes narrowing. Unohana was his oldest contemporary, the most powerful of the original Gotei 13 aside from himself. For her to so firmly advocate for a non-aggressive approach was significant. It carried a weight that even he could not easily dismiss. A low chuckle came from Captain Shunsui Kyoraku, his pink haori draped over his shoulders. My, Captain Unohana, taking a personal interest. How very out of character. This must be quite the fellow. Unohana's gaze flickered to him, her smile serene as ever. A doctor is always interested in a unique medical case, Captain Kyoraku. Yamamoto slammed the butt of his staff on the floor, the sound echoing like a thunderclap. Enough. Your recommendation is noted, Captain Unohana. But the Gotei 13 will not stand idle while a foreign god sets up a kingdom in our backyard. His eyes swept over the assembled captains. This Naruto Uzumaki will be brought in. Willingly, or by force. The balance will be maintained. Unohana bowed her head. As you command, Captain Commander. But as she stood in her place, her mind was not on the politics of the room. It was on a pair of brilliant blue eyes, a wry smile, and the memory of a crimson light that sang a song of power and peace. The Gotei 13 could make their plans. They could issue their commands. But they had no idea what they were truly dealing with. And she found, to her own profound surprise, that she would not let them destroy something so magnificent before she had the chance to fully understand it. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. The Red God of the Rukongai. The 78th district of the Rukongai, once a synonym for desperation, had found a new name for itself, the Still Zone. It was an unofficial title, born in the hushed conversations of its residents and the baffled reports of Seraite observers, but it was accurate. The constant, grinding hum of despair had been replaced by the murmur of life. A makeshift market had sprung up, trading salvaged goods and, miraculously, food grown in small, newly fertile patches of earth. Children, who once huddled in fear, now played games in the dusty streets. Their laughter a sound more precious than any currency. The change was not wrought by laws or governance, but by a presence. A sun that had risen in their perpetual twilight. Kento, a man, whose face was a roadmap of scars from a life of brutal thuggery, now stood guard at the edge of the district. He leaned on a thick wooden staff, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp. A few months ago, he would have been the one preying on newcomers. Now, he was their first line of defense. He owed his new purpose to the man in the hut. The Shinigami of the Blood Moon. He remembered the day the blonde man had found him, bleeding out in an alley after a rival gang had left him for dead. He had expected a final kick, another soul stepping over him. Instead, a hand had rested on his chest, and a power that felt like warm sunlight had poured into him, sealing his wounds and, more profoundly, quieting the storm of rage and hunger that had defined his entire existence. He hadn't been asked for fealty. He hadn't been given orders. He had simply been healed, and in that moment of undeserved kindness, he had found something worth protecting. So he watched the border. Most of the time, it was quiet. But today, the air grew heavy. The calm that permeated the still zone was being pushed back, compressed by an approaching pressure that felt like a jagged knife scraping against glass. It was violent, chaotic, and it reeked of bloodlust. Kento gripped his staff, his knuckles white. The residents felt it too. The laughter died, market stalls went quiet, and doors were shuttered. A figure appeared at the end of the long, straight road that led into the district's heart. He was impossibly tall and built like a mountain of muscle and scars. A ragged captain's haori was draped over his shoulders, and he carried a chipped, oversized zanpakuto with a disdainful ease. An eye patch covered his right eye, but his left, a wild, green orb, gleamed with manic excitement. Perched on his shoulder like a cheerful pink parasite was a tiny, giggling girl with a lieutenant's badge. Kento had heard stories. Every soul in the Rukongai knew the legend of the 11th Division captain, the monster who lived only for the fight. Kenpachi Zaraki. Kenny, look, the tiny girl, Yakiru Kusajishi, chirped, pointing. The air feels all thick and yummy here. Not spiky, but full. Like a big rice ball. Zaraki's grin stretched wider, a terrifying crescent in his scarred face. Yeah, this is the place. His spiritual pressure rolled forward in waves, a physical force that cracked the dry earth and sent a tremor through Kento's very soul. It was a simple, brutal message. I am here. Face me or be broken. Kento stood his ground, trembling but resolute. He would not let this monster disturb the peace. This is a protected district, he called out. His voice hoarse. Turn back. Zaraki didn't even seem to register him as a person. He was a piece of the landscape, a pebble on the path to the mountain. I'm looking for the one in charge. Zaraki boomed, his voice a gravelly roar. The one who makes the air feel like this. Tell him Kenpachi Zaraki has come to play. From the center of the district, a calm voice replied, carrying effortlessly over the oppressive pressure. He heard you the first time. You're scaring the kids. Naruto emerged from his hut, walking with an unhurried gait. He wore the same simple black shihakusho, his hands tucked into his sleeves. The oppressive, jagged ryutsu of Zaraki met the serene, oceanic pressure of Naruto, and the air between them seemed to shimmer and warp. The residents felt the crushing weight on their souls lift, shielded by their protector. Naruto's presence didn't shout, it simply was, an immovable object meeting an unstoppable force. He came to a stop about 50 feet from the captain. His expression one of mild annoyance. You're the second captain to come sniffing around my home. At least the other one had the courtesy not to act like a wild animal. Zaraki's grin became ecstatic. So it's you. He could feel it, the bottomless well of power hidden behind that placid face. It was everything the reports had said and more. It was a battle that promised everything. Good. Don't want to waste time cutting down the small fry. He rested his zanpakuto on his shoulder. They say you made a hollow fall apart just by looking at it. They say you have the power of a god. I don't give a damn about any of that. I just want to know one thing. He pointed his chipped blade at Naruto. Are you strong? Naruto's lips twitched into a small, humorless smile. Strong enough not to need to prove it to every loud-mouthed brute who comes knocking. Yakiru giggled. He called you a brute, Kenny. He did. Zaraki laughed, a booming, joyous sound. He took a step forward, and the ground beneath his foot spider-webbed with cracks. I'm gonna enjoy this. Naruto sighed. I really don't have time for this. He raised a hand, not in aggression, but in a placating gesture. Go home, Kenpachi. There are bigger things to worry about than a sparring match. There is nothing bigger than this. Zaraki roared, and he lunged. He didn't use shunpo or any refined technique. He just moved, covering the 50 feet in an instant of pure, explosive force. His blade descended, not with the grace of a swordsman, but with the world-splitting gravity of a falling meteor. The air screamed as it cut a path toward Naruto's head. Naruto didn't move back, he moved in. At the last possible nanosecond, his body blurred. He flowed to the side, the edge of the massive blade passing inches from his face. The wind from it whipping his blonde hair. He dropped low, his hand shooting out not to strike, but to slap the flat of Zaraki's blade, redirecting its immense momentum. The sword, meant to cleave him in two, instead plunged into the earth, burying itself up to the hilt and blasting a 10-foot crater of dust and rock into the air. Zaraki's wild eye widened in surprise and delight. No one had ever dodged that first strike so effortlessly. He wrenched his blade from the ground as Naruto flowed around him, a disorienting dance of feints and dodges. Zaraki swung again and again. His movements brutal and powerful, each strike capable of leveling a building. But he hit nothing. Naruto was a ghost, a leaf on the wind, never where the blade was, always just outside its reach. His taijutsu, honed in a world of faster, more agile combat, was simply on another level. Stand still and fight me. Zaraki bellowed, his frustration mounting into a gleeful rage. Quote, fighting isn't always about hitting things, Naruto replied, his voice calm as he ducked under a wide, horizontal slash. It's about understanding. And I understand you perfectly. You love this. The clang of steel, the thrill of a near-death blow. You're not a killer. You're a warrior looking for a conversation, and your sword is your only language. As he spoke, he pressed the attack. He didn't use a weapon. His fists and feet became blurs. He struck at Zaraki's joints, his nerve clusters, the openings in his wild swings. His blows landed with the force of hammers, but against Zaraki's monstrous spiritual and physical durability. They were like stones against a fortress wall. Zaraki grunted, intrigued rather than hurt, and swung his blade in a massive arc, forcing Naruto back. Enough dancing, Zaraki roared, and this time, his spiritual pressure flared, a golden aura of raw power erupting around him. He was getting serious. Naruto landed lightly on his feet, skidding to a halt. He looked at Zaraki's glowing form, then at the terrified faces of the souls peeking from their homes. This couldn't continue in the middle of the district. Fine, Naruto said, his tone shifting. The annoyance was gone, replaced by a focused intensity. You want a real conversation. Let's find a better venue. He made a single, familiar hand sign. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. In a series of smokeless puffs, a dozen perfect copies of Naruto appeared around him. Zaraki stopped, his eye wide with confusion and excitement. What trick is this? The clones didn't answer. Half of them rushed toward the district residence. Get back. Go. Now. They commanded, their voices firm but not frightening. They began herding the souls to a safer distance, forming a protective perimeter. The other 6 clones turned to Zaraki. This is new. Yakiru clapped her hands. More people to play with. The 6 clones attacked as one. They moved with perfect, coordinated chaos, a whirlwind of black and blonde. They were a shinobi squad in miniature, flanking, distracting, and attacking from every conceivable angle. Zaraki laughed, a sound of pure joy, and waded into them. His blade was a blur, cutting one clone in half, which dissipated into spiritual particles. He backhanded another, dispelling it instantly. But for every 2 he destroyed, another 2 would land solid blows, staggering him, throwing him off balance. While Zaraki was occupied, the real Naruto gathered his power. He held his right hand out, and the air above his palm began to churn. The reishi in the atmosphere, the very stuff of the Soul Society, was drawn in, swirling into a vortex of pure, blue-white energy. It spun faster and faster, a miniature galaxy of devastating power, humming with a sound that made the teeth ache. It was a Rasengan, but built from a different kind of energy. A Rei Engan. Zaraki bisected the last clone and turned, his senses screaming. He saw the spinning sphere in Naruto's hand and his grin threatened to split his face in two. That's it. That's the power I felt. He ripped his eye patch off. A cataclysmic explosion of golden Retsu erupted from him, a pillar of energy that shot into the twilight sky. The spiritual pressure was so immense, so unrestrained, that it felt like the world was being physically crushed. This was Kenpachi Zaraki, unsealed. This was the monster of the Gote 13. Come on, he screamed, his voice raw with exhilaration. He charged, his blade held high, no longer just a sword but a conduit for his boundless, destructive power. Naruto met the charge. Let's end this, he said, his voice low. He didn't aim for Zaraki. He aimed for his sword. Rei Engan. Kendo. The sphere of swirling spiritual energy met the descending cleaver. The moment of impact was silent. A single point of impossible pressure. Then, the world exploded. A dome of white and gold light erupted outwards, swallowing both of them. The ground beneath them vaporized instantly, creating a rapidly expanding crater. Buildings for blocks around were torn from their foundations, the scrap wood and metal disintegrating into dust. The shockwave was not sound, but pure concussive force, a tidal wave of spiritual energy that washed over the entire Rukongai. Far away in the Seraite, bells began to ring, alarms screaming as every sensor needle redlined and then broke. The light faded, revealing a scene of utter devastation. A new, shallow crater, a quarter of a mile wide, was now the district's centerpiece. At its heart, two figures stood. Naruto's sleeve was gone, his arm scraped and bruised. He was breathing heavily, though he had no need for air. The sheer force of the impact had been staggering. Zaraki was panting, his body covered in 100 small cuts from the swirling energy of the Rei Engan. His sword arm trembled, but the manic grin was still on his face. His Zanpakuto was intact, but the point where it had met the sphere was glowing cherry red. It was a draw. An immovable object had met an immovable object. Ha! Ha 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 ha! Zaraki began to laugh, a weak but genuinely happy sound. Good. That was good. He swayed on his feet, his energy finally spent. Before either of them could move again, the sky burned. A wall of flame, 100 feet high, erupted between them, separating them with a curtain of incandescent heat. The spiritual pressure that accompanied it was on another level entirely. It was ancient, absolute, and utterly suffocating. It was the pressure of a sun, and it made Zaraki's unsealed power feel like a bonfire in comparison. At the edge of the crater stood a small, ancient man with a long, white beard, leaning on a simple wooden staff. His eyes were slits of pure, commanding fury. Captain Commander Genryusai Shigekuni Yamamoto had arrived. Enough. His voice was not a shout. It was a fundamental command that the world had no choice but to obey. The flames that separated Naruto and Zaraki dissipated, drawn back into his staff. Kenpachi Zaraki, you will stand down. You have destroyed a district and engaged an unclassified entity against my implicit orders. Zaraki, for the first time, looked chastised, like a dog caught chewing the furniture. He grumbled, putting his eye patch back on. The familiar weight sealing his power and calming the storm. He was strong, old man. You should have seen it. Yamamoto ignored him. His fiery gaze settled on Naruto. He took in the scene. The crater. The lingering traces of two colossal spiritual pressures, and the blond man who stood at the center of it all, looking not defeated, but defiant. He had fought the Kenpachi to a standstill. Unohana's report had not been an exaggeration. Naruto Uzumaki, Yamamoto stated, his voice like grinding stone. By my authority as Captain Commander of the Gote 13, you are hereby summoned to the Seraite to account for your existence and your actions. You will come now. There will be no further debate. Naruto met the old man's gaze. He felt the immense, world-burning power held in that frail body. This was a man who had forgotten more about combat than Zaraki had ever known. But Naruto was not afraid. He was tired of being treated like a problem to be solved. "And if I refuse?" Naruto asked, his voice quiet but firm. Yamamoto's eyes narrowed until they were burning embers. The temperature of the crater floor rose by 50 degrees. "Then I will consider your presence here an act of war. And I will personally reduce you, and this entire district, to ashes from which nothing will ever grow again." It wasn't a threat, it was a promise. Naruto held his gaze for a long, tense moment. He looked past the captain commander, at the faces of the souls he had inadvertently made his responsibility. He had brought this destruction upon them by engaging Zaraki. He could fight Yamamoto. He might even win, though the cost would be apocalyptic. But these people would not survive the crossfire. He let out a long, slow breath, releasing the tension in his shoulders. He had made his decision. "Fine," Naruto said, his voice laced with resignation. "I'll go to your city. I'll answer your questions." He held up a hand. "But know this, I am not your soldier, and I am not your prisoner. I am coming as a guest. And I expect to be treated as one." Yamamoto gave a curt, almost imperceptible nod. "Your status will be determined by your testimony." He turned. "We are leaving." Zaraki, slinging his Zanpakuto over his shoulder, shot Naruto a final, appreciative grin. "Next time," he muttered, "no interruptions." Naruto watched them go, two of the most powerful beings in this dimension. One a monster of battle, the other a god of war. He had just put himself on a path to the heart of their power structure, to the city of the Shinigami who viewed him as a threat. He was walking into the lion's den. And he was doing it willingly. He looked around at the devastation, at the homes turned to dust. His fight had done this. His presence had invited this. A bitter feeling, one he hadn't felt in a long time, settled in his stomach. The path of power was always paved with destruction. In a dark, sterile chamber deep within the Seraite, the 46 robed in Hooded figures of Central 46 observed the aftermath of the battle through a mystical screen. Their voices were disembodied, cold, and laced with a fear that bordered on hysteria. "Did you see that?" He matched the Kenpachi. "His power, it's not Retsu. It's something else, unnatural. He creates living soldiers from nothing. He wields energy that can meet a Zanpakuto head-on. He is a plague, a singularity that will collapse the entire system. Yamamoto is a fool to bring him here. He should have been annihilated on sight." A senior magistrate, his face completely hidden in shadow, spoke, his voice cutting through the panic. An order was issued. A threat of this magnitude must be eliminated. Yamamoto hesitates, blinded by his warrior's code, hoping to understand or control the anomaly. "He is bringing the wolf into the sheepfold." Another cried. "Then the shepherds must act where the guard dog has failed," the senior magistrate said. His voice was chillingly calm. "The order for assassination stands. If Yamamoto will not carry it out in the Rukongai, then it will be carried out within the walls of the Seraite. The moment this, Naruto Uzumaki, presents an opportunity, he is to be erased. The balance is absolute. The law is absolute. No single being can be allowed to possess such power." A murmur of assent went through the chamber. The decree was sealed. Meanwhile, in the tranquil gardens of the 4th Division, Retsu Unohana sat, observing a koi pond. The tremor of the battle had reached her clear as a bell. She had felt Zaraki release his full power, a sensation she knew intimately. And she had felt the other power, Naruto's, meet it without breaking. It hadn't been jagged or chaotic. It had been focused, dense, and wielded with an artist's precision. Captain Kyoraku appeared beside her, his lazy demeanor a stark contrast to the tension that still lingered in the air. "Quite a fireworks show, wouldn't you say, Captain Unohana?" "Indeed," she replied, not taking her eyes off the water. "Captain Zaraki seems to have found a new friend. A friend who can level a district," Shunsui noted, fanning himself. "The old man is bringing him in. Central 46 is in an uproar. They're calling him a walking apocalypse." He paused, his gaze becoming surprisingly sharp. "You're the only one who has spoken to him. What's your take, really?" Unohana finally turned to look at him, her serene smile in place. "My take, Captain Kyoraku, is that we are all so focused on the size of the wave, we have failed to ask what is causing the tide to rise." She looked in the direction of the now quiet Rukongai. "He is not the true threat. He is a symptom of a much larger illness. And bringing him here, into the heart of our rigid world, may be the most dangerous, or the most necessary, thing we have ever done. Her words were calm, measured, and perfectly logical. But Shunsui, a man who understood the nuances of the soul better than most, heard the unspoken truth beneath them. She wasn't just a doctor's clinical assessment. It was a declaration of interest. A line being drawn. Retsu Unohana had chosen a side, and the game had just become infinitely more complex. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. The Caged Tiger's Court. The journey to the Seraite was a silent, tense affair. Naruto walked, unbound and unescorted in the traditional sense, flanked by the two most formidable captains of the Gote 13. Yamamoto strode ahead, his wooden staff tapping a stern rhythm on the purified ground, his very presence a suffocating blanket of ancient authority. To Naruto's left, Kenpachi Zaraki ambled along. A shark forced to swim at a leisurely pace, his manic energy now a low, predatory hum. He kept glancing at Naruto, his grin a mixture of respect and the promise of a rematch. Naruto, for his part, was an island of calm in a sea of raw power. He observed the transition from the chaos of the Rukongai to the stark, oppressive order of the Seraite. The high, white walls of Seraite stone seemed to suck the very color from the air. The streets were unnaturally clean, the buildings impossibly uniform. Shinigami of all ranks stopped and stared as they passed, their whispers like the rustling of dry leaves. He could feel their fear, their awe, their resentment. It was a familiar cocktail, one he had tasted his entire life. It no longer bothered him. He was not a prisoner being marched to his cell. He was a foreign dignitary arriving for a summit, and his bearing reflected that. His shoulders were relaxed, his gaze forward, taking in the architecture of his gilded cage. Old feel the thousands of spiritual signatures packed into this city, a dense web of power, but it all felt brittle. Structured to the point of fragility. A house of cards built by a master craftsman, beautiful and intricate. But vulnerable to a single, disruptive gust of wind. He suspected he was that gust of wind. They arrived at the vast compound of the First Division. The air here was so thick, with Yamamoto's Retsu, that it felt like breathing syrup. Two massive doors, large enough for a giant to walk through, swung open, revealing the hall where the captains waited. They stood in their neat, imposing rows. A living gallery of power and prestige. Every eye was on him. Naruto walked into the center of the room, Yamamoto taking his place at the head. Zaraki lumbered off to his designated spot, his wild energy a discordant note in the otherwise solemn symphony of the captains. The doors boomed shut behind Naruto, sealing him in. The collective spiritual pressure of the 13 captains descended upon him, a silent, coordinated attempt to intimidate, to crush his will before he even spoke. It was like being at the bottom of the ocean. Naruto did not flinch. He did not brace himself. He simply stood there, his own immense, serene power a bubble of calm in the storm. The pressure washed over him, unable to find purchase. It was like trying to drown a fish. He met their gazes one by one, his blue eyes clear and unwavering. Yamamoto's voice broke the silence, deep and resonant. You stand before the full authority of the Gote 13, Naruto Uzumaki. You are an anomaly of unprecedented power, residing within our jurisdiction without rank or allegiance. You have caused significant destruction. Explain yourself. Before Naruto could answer, a voice, cold and aristocratic, cut in. Explain himself. He is a vagrant soul from the Rukongai. What right does he have to exist with such power? It is a vulgarity, a disruption to the natural order of things. Naruto's gaze shifted to the speaker. Captain Byakuya Kuchiki, his handsome face a mask of noble disdain, his hand resting on the hilt of his Zanpakuto. He was the embodiment of the tradition and law that Naruto found so suffocating. Naruto offered a small, disarming smile. Right, he asked, his voice echoing slightly in the vast hall. I didn't realize existence was something you had to apply for. I live, I breathe, well, I don't, but you get the point. My right to exist is the fact that I exist. The same as you, the same as everyone in this room. He tilted his head. Or is your life more valid than mine simply be? 'Cause you were born into the right family and given the right title. A vein pulsed on Byakuya's temple. The direct challenge to his noble status, delivered so casually, was a greater insult than any curse. His spiritual pressure flared with cold fury. Insolence. A sharp, female voice snapped. Captain Soy Fawn of the 2nd Division stepped forward, her small frame radiating lethal intent. You speak of rights after leveling a city block. You consorted with the Kenpachi in an unsanctioned duel that endangered countless souls. By our law, that is a crime punishable by immediate execution. I didn't start that fight, Naruto countered. His tone reasonable, he gestured with his chin toward Zaraki. Your walking disaster area over there came to my home looking for a brawl. I did my best to lead him away from the populated areas. If you have a complaint about the damages, I suggest you forward it to your 11th Division's Property Damage Department. I'm sure they have a thick file. Zaraki let out a guttural laugh. He's right. It was a damn good fight, too. Silence, Kenpachi, Yamamoto commanded, his voice sharp. Naruto's gaze swept the room again. Look, I get it. I'm new, I'm different, and different is scary, but I haven't done anything to you. I haven't attacked your city, I haven't harmed your people. I've built a safe place in a corner of your world you've clearly forgotten about. My, so you're a philanthropist now. A lazy voice drawled. Captain Shunsui Kyoraku, his pink Haorian sacket giving him the appearance of a vacationing poet, fanned himself gently. It's just that, well, folks with your kind of power don't usually show up out of nowhere just to run a charity. Everyone wants something. What is it you're after, I wonder? It was a clever, folksy probe, assigned to sound harmless while digging for motive. Naruto saw the keen intellect behind the lazy eyes. Peace, Naruto answered, and the simple honesty of the word silenced the room for a second. They had enough fighting to last several lifetimes. I came here by accident. I'm just trying to live quietly. The only thing I want is to be left alone. As he spoke, he felt a subtle shift in the air. A flicker, a wrongness. It was an almost imperceptible twisting of the reishi around him, a manipulation of the light and sound that was so masterful, so seamless, that a normal soul would never have noticed it. But Naruto's senses were not normal. He felt the world not just through his eyes and ears, but as a living tapestry of spiritual energy. And someone had just tried to add a false thread. His gaze was instantly drawn to the source. Captain Sosuke Aizen, the man with the kind, scholarly face and the gentle smile. He stood perfectly still, his expression one of polite interest. But for a microsecond, Naruto felt the whisper of Aizen's power, a touch of absolute hypnosis, trying to worm its way into his perception. It had failed, not because Naruto had actively blocked it, but because his senses were simply incompatible with the mechanism. It was like trying to play a video on a radio. Naruto's eyes locked with Aizen's. He didn't betray his discovery with a gasp or an accusation. He simply held the captain's gaze. And for a fraction of a second, his calm, blue eyes held a flicker of cold, hard understanding. It was a silent message, passed between them in an instant. I know what you just did. Aizen's gentle smile did not falter, but a flicker of something unreadable, surprise, frustration, respect, passed through his brown eyes. He gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement. A confession and a challenge all in one. The game had been recognized. The most dangerous man in the Soul Society now knew that there was someone on the board who could see his invisible moves. Naruto broke the gaze, turning his attention back to the assembly at large. He had to take control of this situation. He had been on the defensive long enough. You're all standing here, ling me like I'm the biggest threat this world has ever seen, Naruto said, his voice rising with a new authority. You're worried about the waves I'm making, but you're completely ignoring the fact that your whole ship is sinking. Yamamoto's eyes narrowed. What is the meaning of this? I'm talking about the holes, Naruto said, his gaze sweeping over them. The empty spaces. The places where souls used to be. Entire communities. Gone. Not killed. Not eaten by hollows. Erased. Wiped from existence so completely that there isn't even a ghost of a memory left behind. Your 4th Division captain has seen it. Ask her. Every head in the room swiveled to face Retsu Unohana. She stood in her usual serene posture, but her eyes were fixed on Naruto, a spark of approval in their depths. She bowed her head to the captain commander. He is correct, sir. I have personally investigated 3 such sites in the outer districts of the Rukongai. The phenomenon is unlike anything I have ever encountered. It is a form of spiritual destruction that leaves no residue. A perfect erasure. A nervous murmur went through the captains. This was new information for most of them. This was a threat that couldn't be cut with a sword. This is the real problem, Naruto pressed, his voice resonating with conviction. A silent plague that's eating your world from the edges in. And you're all in here, worried about me because my spiritual pressure is a little too loud for your liking. You're pointing your swords in the wrong direction. His words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. He had successfully reframed the entire debate. He was no longer the defendant. He was the harbinger of a greater doom, a Paul Revere for an apocalypse no one else had seen coming. Yamamoto was silent for a long time, his ancient face grim. The dual testimony of the anomaly himself and his most trusted, senior captain could not be dismissed. He had brought a tiger into his court, expecting to cage it, only for the Jeer to inform him that a dragon was burning the forest down outside. Your claims have been noted, Yamamoto said finally, his voice gravelly. This matter of erasures will be investigated by the Gote 13. As for you, Naruto Uzumaki, your fate is yet to be decided. He slammed his staff on the ground. You will remain within the Seraite as a guest of the 4th Division, under the direct observation of Captain Unohana. You will not leave its grounds without my express permission. Am I understood? It was a compromise. Not a prisoner, but not free. A watched guest. Naruto knew it was the best he was going to get for now. Understood, he said with a nod. This meeting is adjourned, Yamamoto declared. The captains began to disperse, their formations breaking. Zaraki shot Naruto a thumbs up and a wide grin. Byakuya stalked away, his expression colder than ever. Aizen walked past, his kind smile back in place, but his eyes held a new, calculating depth as they met Naruto's. It was a silent promise of a future confrontation. Soon, the vast hall was empty, save for Naruto. He let out a long breath, the tension of the confrontation finally leaving him. He had survived. More than that, He had planted a seed of doubt and shifted the focus. It was a small victory, but a crucial one. A soft footstep approached from behind. That was impressively handled. He turned. Retsu Unohana stood there, her hands clasped before her. Her serene smile looking, for the first time, entirely genuine. I'm a better talker than I look, Naruto replied with a slight shrug. Comes from years of trying to convince people not to kill me. Her smile widened. You have a talent for it. You've turned the most powerful military force in the world from your executioner into your reluctant host in the space of an afternoon. Few could manage such a feat. She paused, her gaze softening. You look like a man who has fought a war and now finds himself in a pointless skirmish. The gardens of my division are quiet. I imagine you could use some. Quote. It was an invitation, offered with grace and a clear understanding of what he had just endured. It was a lifeline in a sea of hostility. Yeah, Naruto said, a real, weary smile touching his lips. Some quiet sounds good. Lead the way, Captain. The 4th Division barracks were a stark contrast to the rest of the Seraite. While still orderly, the atmosphere was one of healing. Not martial prowess. The air smelled of sterile linens and medicinal herbs. Shinigami moved with a quiet purpose, their faces filled with compassion rather than aggression. Unohana led him past the main buildings, through a simple wooden gate, and into a hidden garden that took Naruto's breath away. It was a masterpiece of controlled nature. A small, clear pond filled with vibrant orange and white koi reflected the twilight sky. Moss-covered stones were arranged in pleasing, organic patterns. A gentle stream trickled nearby, its sound a soothing balm. It was an oasis of life and peace in the heart of the city of death. Unohana gestured to a smooth, flat rock near the edge of the pond. Please. Naruto sat, the tension finally flowing out of him. He watched the fish swim lazy circles in the water. For a few minutes, they sat in a comfortable silence, the only sounds the water and the distant hum of the barracks. You took a risk, Naruto said quietly, not looking at her. Speaking up for me in there. You didn't have to. I spoke the truth, Unohana replied, her voice soft. She sat near him, maintaining a respectful distance. The phenomena you described are real. To allow the council to fixate on you while a greater threat brews would have been a dereliction of my duty. Duty, Naruto mused. Everyone here is so concerned with duty and rules and balance. In my world, we just tried to protect the people we cared about. It was a lot simpler. Messier, but simpler. Perhaps simplicity is a luxury we can no longer afford, Unohana said. Or perhaps we have. Made things so complex that we've forgotten the simple truths. Her gaze was on the pond, but her attention was on him. You are not like anyone I have ever met, Naruto Uzumaki. You carry a power that could shatter this world. Yet you use it to make a small patch of dirt fertile and to calm the rage of a lost soul. Why? Naruto trailed a finger in the air just above the water's surface, a faint ripple of golden energy making the koi scatter and then return. Because I've seen what happens when power is used for its own sake. It breaks things. People, countries, the world. I spent my whole life fighting that. I'm done breaking things. I'd rather try to build something, even if it's just a quiet corner where people don't have to be afraid. His words were simple, but they resonated with a deep, weary truth that Unohana understood perfectly. She, too, had a history with power used for its own sake. A history written in blood and buried under 1,000 years of serene smiles. A noble goal, she said. But a quiet corner can attract unwanted attention when it is built in the middle of a king's highway. Then the king should learn to build his road around it, Naruto countered, a hint of his old stubbornness in his voice. He finally turned to look at her, his blue eyes searching her dark ones. Why did you really help me, Captain? It was more than just duty. I felt it. Unohana held his gaze. The polite mask of the captain of the 4th Division fell away for a moment, replaced by something older, more honest. A spark of the monster in the cage looked out through her eyes, not with malice, but with a profound, hungry curiosity. Because for the first time in a very long time, she said, her voice a low, intimate murmur, I met someone who was not afraid of the power they wielded. Nor were they afraid of the power they sensed in me. She gave a small, almost sad smile. You see the cage, don't you? And the tiger pacing within it. And you are not afraid. Naruto didn't deny it. He simply nodded. Everyone deserves to have someone who isn't afraid of their darkest parts. The air between them changed. The last barrier of formality dissolved, replaced by the fragile, powerful beginnings of a true connection. They were two of a kind, two beings of immense, monstrous power who had chosen to walk a path of restraint. They were alone in the world, and they had just found each other. The Gote 13 will watch you, Unohana said, her tone becoming slightly more formal again, a necessary return to their current reality. Aizen, in particular, he is not what he seems. Be wary of his kindness. The one with the nice glasses and the creepy smile. Naruto chuckled. Yeah, I got that feeling. He tried a little mind trick on me in the meeting. It didn't work. Unohana's eyes widened slightly in genuine surprise. He used Kyoka Suigetsu on you. And you were unaffected. It felt like a lie, Naruto explained. Like someone was trying to tell me the sky was green when I could feel that it was gray. It was just wrong. She stared at him, her mind processing the implications. To be immune to Kyoka Suigetsu's perfect hypnosis was a strategic advantage that was literally unheard of. This man was more of a paradox than she had even imagined. You are, she said, a note of awe in her voice, full of surprises, Naruto Uzumaki. I've been told that before, he said, his smile finally reaching his eyes. So, Captain Unohana, what's the first step in investigating the end of the world? She looked at him, the reluctant guest, the caged god, the only person in this dimension who saw all of her and didn't run. And for the first time, the path ahead, though fraught with a terrifying, unknown enemy, felt a little less lonely. The first step, she said, a new resolve in her voice. As a proper cup of tea. And then, we begin our work. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. A healer's blade, a god's burden. The next few days passed in a state of surreal tranquility. Naruto W. As a ghost in the machine of the 4th Division. He was assigned sparse, but comfortable quarters, and was afforded the freedom to wander the division's grounds, a privilege he knew was a thinly veiled method of constant observation. Shinigami would stop their work and stare as he passed, a mixture of fear and fascination on their faces. He was the monster from the fairy tales, the beast that had fought the Kenpachi to a standstill. Now living among the healers. He spent most of his time in Unohana's private garden, finding a strange solace in its manufactured peace. He didn't need to eat or sleep, so he would often sit by the koi pond for hours, sifting through his own memories, trying to reconcile the boy who wanted to be Hokage with the ancient, powerful being he had become. He felt a profound sense of dislocation, a man out of time and reality. This garden, with its quiet beauty, was the only anchor he had. Unohana was a discreet but constant presence. She would join him in the mornings, bringing 2 cups of tea. And they would sit in comfortable silence. Their conversations were rarely about the looming threat or the politics of the Seraite. Instead, they spoke of small things. She asked him about the elemental nations, about the texture of rain on real leaves, the taste of ramen from a particular stall. He asked her about the history of her division, about the strange spiritual illnesses she had treated. It was a slow, careful dance of discovery. Each question was a gentle probe, a mapping of the other's soul. Naruto found himself captivated by the sheer depth of her knowledge and the quiet, unyielding strength beneath her serene facade. She was a library of experiences, a being who had seen empires rise and fall, and she spoke of it all with a detached, melancholic wisdom. Unohana, in turn, was endlessly intrigued by him. He was a paradox. He possessed a power that defied all known principles of the Soul Society, yet he spoke with the simple, earnest language of a young man. He talked about his friends, a brooding rival, a sharp-witted kunoichi, a perverted, white-haired teacher, with a warmth and affection that was achingly human. He was a god with a mortal heart, and she found that juxtaposition more compelling than any display of raw power. One evening, as the perpetual twilight of the Soul Society deepened into a darker gray, she found him by the pond, staring at his own reflection in the water. "You are troubled," she stated, her voice soft. It was not a question. Naruto didn't look up. "I'm just thinking about your old home, about my power," he corrected. "Here, it's calm. It feels like a part of me, like my own blood. But back home, it was a cage. I had a monster sealed inside me, a great demon fox made of pure hatred. For most of my life, everyone looked at me and saw him. They saw a weapon, a threat, a demon to be feared and hated." He finally looked at her, his blue eyes holding a deep, ancient pain. "I spent my whole life fighting to be seen as myself, not as the monster I carried." Unohana listened, her expression unreadable but her dark eyes filled with a profound, knowing sadness. She understood. Oh, how she understood. "Power is a burden, Naruto Uzumaki," she said quietly. "For some, it is a weapon to be wielded. For others, it is a mask to be worn. And for a select few, it is a sin to be atoned for." She rose to her feet in a single, fluid motion. "Come with me. There is something I wish to show you." He rose, his curiosity piqued. She led him away from the garden, not toward the main barracks, but deeper into the 4th Division's compound, toward a section he had not been permitted to enter. They came to a heavy wooden door, sealed not with a lock, but with a powerful Kido barrier that shimmered faintly in the air. Unohana placed her palm on the door, and the barrier dissolved with a soft chime. She led him down a long, sterile white corridor, the air growing colder, more still. The scent of herbs and medicine was replaced by the clean, metallic smell of ozone and old stone. They descended a flight of stairs, then another, going deep beneath the earth, far below the foundations of the healing wards above. They emerged into a vast, cavernous space. It was a stark, empty chamber, the walls and floor made of smooth, black stone that seemed to absorb the light. The only feature was a single, raised dais in the center of the room. The silence here was absolute, a heavy, suffocating stillness that was far more intimidating than the chaos of any battlefield. This was a place of judgment, a place of execution. This was Mugen, the infinite prison, in miniature. "What is this place?" Naruto asked, his voice a low murmur in the oppressive quiet. "This is the original purpose of the 4th Division," Unohana said, her voice devoid of its usual warmth. It was flat, cold, and resonant. Before it was a place of healing, it was the holding pen for the Gote 13's most dangerous criminals. A place of containment and elimination. The healing arts were merely a byproduct of studying the bodies of those we executed, learning how to put things back together after we had taken them apart. Naruto felt A chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. The gentle, healing 4th Division was built on a foundation of death. Unohana walked to the center of the room, her footsteps echoing in the vast emptiness. She turned to face him. Her serene smile completely gone. Her face was a blank, emotionless mask, and her eyes held an abyss of cold, lethal intent. The gentle captain was gone. In her place stood something terrifying. "You spoke of the monster you carried within you," she said, her voice echoing with a strange, double resonance. "A burden placed upon you. A cage you did not build." She paused, her gaze pinning him in place. "My burden is different. I am not the cage. I am the monster." Slowly, deliberately, she reached up and began to undo the thick braid that hung over her chest. As her fingers worked, the immense, dormant power he had always sensed within her began to stir. It was not a leak, it was a deliberate, controlled awakening. A leviathan stirring in the deep. She pulled the braid free, and her long, black hair cascaded over her shoulders, framing her face. The movement seemed to release the final seal. Her spiritual pressure, once a calm, deep lake, became a raging, bottomless ocean of pure, unadulterated killing intent. It was a power that dwarfed Zaraki's. It was the power of a primal force of death. A beautiful, jagged scar became visible on her throat, just below her jawline. A mark he had never seen before. The Gote 13 was not always a collection of disciplined soldiers, she said, her voice now a low, dangerous purr. In the beginning, it was a gathering of the worst killers and criminals in the Soul Society, brought together by Genryusai Yamamoto to form a brutal but effective fighting force. And I was the worst of them all. She placed a hand on the hilt of her Zanpakuto. I was a master of every sword style in existence. I sought not balance, not peace, but the thrill of battle, the perfection of the killing stroke. I named myself, Yak. Hiru. 8,000 styles, because there was no technique of the blade I had not mastered. She took a slow step toward him, the pressure of her Retsu so immense it felt like a physical weight on his shoulders. But he did not step back. He met her gaze, his own power a steady, unshakable mountain against her storm. I was the first to hold the title you now associate with Captain Zaraki, she whispered. The words dripping with 1,000 years of blood. I was the first Kenpachi. The confession hung in the air, a truth so explosive it seemed to warp the very fabric of the room. The serene healer, the mother figure of the Gote 13, was the original god of the sword, a title synonymous with the purest, most brutal love of combat. I killed until there was no one left who could challenge me, she continued. Her eyes locked on his. I was a monster enjoying a rampage. But there is no joy in a battle you know you will win. The strength I had sought became a prison of its own. I was alone at the summit, with nothing but the ghosts of those I had slain for company. She gestured to the room around them. So, at Yamamoto's command, I sealed my sword. I learned the art of healing, the reverse of the blade. As a penance, I became Retsu Unohana, a healer, and I buried Yakiru Unohana, the killer, so deep that the world forgot she ever existed. She stopped just a few feet from him, her killing intent a palpable aura around her. This was her test, her ultimate confession. She was showing him the truest, darkest part of her soul, the blood-soaked monster she had hidden for a millennium. She wanted to see his reaction. Fear, disgust, revulsion. Naruto looked at the woman before him. He saw the killer, yes. He felt the colossal, terrifying power. But he also saw the loneliness of the summit. He saw the woman who had reached the pinnacle of her desire only to find it empty. He saw the eternal penance, the burden of a past she could never escape. He saw a kindred spirit. He reached out, his movements slow and deliberate, and gently touched the scar on her throat. His fingers were warm against her skin. Unohana flinched, not from his touch, but from the unexpectedness of it. No one had ever dared to touch her with such gentle intimacy, especially not in this state. A self-inflicted wound, Naruto asked quietly, his thumb tracing the old, faded line. From a battle you almost lost, or a battle you were afraid to win. Her breath hitched. His perception was terrifying. He hadn't just seen her power, he had seen the one moment of true despair in her past as a warrior, the only wound she ever received in a serious duel, a wound from a young, wild Zaraki, a battle that had reawakened her love for combat only to have it snatched away when he fell before he could reach his full potential. It was the wound that had solidified her decision to seal her sword away, lest she kill the only hope for a true rival she had ever found. "You are not a monster, Yakiru," Naruto said, his voice soft but firm, using the name she had just confessed. He let his hand fall away. "You were a warrior who lost her way. And you chose to find a new one. A harder one. It talks more strength to heal than it does to kill. I know that better than anyone." He gave her a small, sad smile. "I told you about the demon I carried. Kurama. For years, he was nothing but rage and hatred. But in the end, he became my friend. He died to save me. To save everyone. People can change. Even monsters." He took a step back, giving her space, and held out his hand. From his palm, a gentle, crimson light began to glow. The same light he had used to pacify the hollow. It was warm, serene, and filled with an ancient, unconditional empathy. "I am the Blood Moon Shinigami," he said, his voice resonating with his true nature. "I am a being of balance. I stand between the worlds of the living and the dead, between order and chaos, between existence and the void. It is my nature to see both sides of a soul, the light and the dark." The crimson light pulsed gently, not as an attack, but as an offering. An offering of understanding. "I see Retsu Unohana, the greatest healer in the soul society, whose compassion has saved thousands," he said, his voice gentle. Then his eyes hardened slightly, his tone gaining a deep respect. "And I see Yakiru Unohana, the first Kenpachi, a swordsman, and of such skill that she became a force of nature. I am not afraid of one, and I do not condemn the other. They are both you, and you are magnificent." Tears welled in Unohana's eyes. For 1,000 years, she had lived a lie. She had bifurcated her own soul, believing one half to be a monstrous sin that must be eternally suppressed. She had resigned herself to a lonely penance, convinced that no one could ever accept the truth of what she was. And now, this man, this anomaly from another world, had looked upon her darkest self, her greatest shame, and had not called her a monster. He had called her magnificent. The colossal killing intent that had filled the room didn't vanish. It receded, flowing back into her, no longer a raging storm, but a calm, deep ocean once more. The coldness in her eyes melted away, replaced by a raw, profound vulnerability she had not shown to another living soul in a millennium. A single tear traced a path down her cheek. "No one," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, "has ever looked at me and seen both." "Then they weren't looking hard enough," Naruto said softly. In that moment, in the cold, dark heart of the 4th Division's bloody history, the bond between them solidified. It was no longer a connection of mutual curiosity or a strategic alliance. It was a bond of absolute, mutual acceptance. He had seen her monster, and she had seen his burden. And in that shared understanding, they found a sanctuary they had never known. She took a shaky breath, composing herself, the serene captain slowly reassembling her mask, but it was different now. It was transparent. He could see the truth behind it, and he knew she was aware of it. "The void," she said, her voice regaining its strength. "The soul erasures. We have a lead." The shift back to the mission was abrupt, but necessary. It was a retreat to safer, more familiar ground after a moment of profound emotional upheaval. "My intelligence network, what remains of it from my former life," she said. A hint of irony in her tone, "has found a pattern. The erasures are not random. They are following ley lines of spiritual energy, converging on a single point in the human world." "Karakura Town. Karakura Town," Naruto repeated. He had felt it from the moment he arrived, a place in the world of the living with an unusually high concentration of spiritual energy. A natural focal point. Whatever this enemy is, it seems to be drawn to spiritual density, Unohana continued, all business now. And Karakura Town is currently the densest point in the human world. If we are to confront it, we must go there. Yamamoto will never allow it, Naruto stated. He has me on lockdown. He will have no choice, Unohana replied, a dangerous glint in her eye. I will present the findings to him myself. A threat of this nature, converging on a location of such spiritual importance, cannot be ignored. And I will make it clear that you are the only one who has demonstrated an ability to perceive the after effects of this enemy, let alone counter it. We are the only two who understand the nature of the threat. He must send us. She looked at him, her resolve like tempered steel. The healer and the killer were no longer two separate beings at war within her. They were finally integrating, becoming two sides of the same perfect blade. Retsu Unohana would use her political capital and reputation to get them to the battlefield. And if diplomacy failed, Yakiru Unohana was prepared to cut a path there herself. We go together, Naruto said, a statement of fact. Their partnership was no longer a matter of convenience. It was a pact. Together, she agreed, giving a firm nod. They left the dark chamber, ascending the stairs back into the sterile, white corridors of the hospital. The air was warmer here, filled with the sounds of life. But the silence of the room below, and the confessions made within it, lingered between them, a new and unbreakable foundation upon which their future would be built. They had shown each other their scars, their burdens, their monsters. And they had not turned away. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. The Harbinger's Silence. The air in Yamamoto's office was thick with the scent of old paper and burning indignation. The captain commander sat behind his massive oak desk, his ancient fingers steepled, his eyes closed as if in meditation. But Naruto could feel the simmering furnace of his Retsu, a volcano barely contained by a thin crust of duty. Unohana stood before the desk, serene and resolute, having just delivered her report. Naruto stood beside her, a silent, imposing presence. Karakura Town, Yamamoto repeated, his voice a low rumble. You are suggesting I deploy two of my most powerful assets, one of whom is effectively a state prisoner, into the human world based on a pattern of disappearances and this one's intuitions. His head tilted in Naruto's direction without opening his eyes. It is more than intuition, Captain Commander, Unohana stated calmly. It is evidence. The void scars, as we have designated them, are appearing along predictable spiritual ley lines. My analysis, cross-referenced with data from the Department of Research and Development, confirms that these lines converge on Karakura Town. Furthermore, Uzumaki is the only individual who has demonstrated a non-standard sensory ability capable of detecting these phenomena at a conceptual level. He is not just an asset, he is our only viable sensor for this threat. Yamamoto's knuckles were white where he gripped the arms of his chair. He was being maneuvered, and he knew it. Unohana had presented a flawless, logical argument, boxing him in with his own system's data. To deny the request would be to willfully ignore a potential apocalypse, a dereliction of duty he could not abide. But to approve it felt like a loss of control, an admission that he needed this unpredictable outsider. And what do you propose to do once you are there? He asked, his voice sharp. Engage a foe whose nature you do not understand. An enemy that erases existence itself. We will observe, identify, and if possible, engage, Naruto spoke up, his tone even and direct. We can't fight what we can't see. And right now, I'm the only one who can see the footprints it leaves behind. Keeping me here is like locking away your only telescope while you're trying to track an incoming meteor. The analogy was simple, direct, and infuriatingly accurate. Yamamoto fell silent for a long, tense minute. The political ramifications were enormous. Central 46 was screaming for Naruto's head. Allowing him to leave the Seraite, armed and in the company of a captain, was an act of profound defiance against their authority. But Yamamoto's first duty was to the preservati on of the soul society and the balance of the worlds, not to the whims of cloistered politicians. Very well, he conceded, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. He opened his eyes, and they were burning coals. I will sanction a clandestine reconnaissance mission to Karakura Town. You will be its primary operatives. Captain Unohana, you are the mission commander. Uzumaki, you are her tactical support. You will be issued Gigai and a Senkaimon will be prepared. Your mission is to gather intelligence. You are not, under any circumstances, to engage the primary threat unless it is absolutely unavoidable. Is that clear? Perfectly. Captain Commander, Unohana said with a respectful bow. Crystal, Naruto affirmed with a nod. One more condition, Yamamoto added, his gaze locking onto Naruto. You will be accompanied by an observer from the 13th Division. A Shinigami I trust to monitor your actions and report back to me directly. Rukia Kuchiki. Naruto recognized the name. Byakuya's adopted sister. It was a political move. A leash. A way for the nobility and the hardliners to feel they had a set of eyes on him. Fine, Naruto said, unconcerned. A babysitter wouldn't change anything. Go, then, Yamamoto ordered, waving a dismissive hand. And may you not doom us all. As they turned and left the office, Naruto glanced at Unohana. Her serene smile was back, but there was a triumphant glint in her eyes. They had won. They were being unleashed. The transition through the Dongai, the precipice world between the Soul Society and the world of the living, was a disorienting, shrieking passage. Rukia Kuchiki, a petite Shinigami with large, expressive violet eyes, stood stiffly beside them, clearly intimidated by the two titans of power she was assigned to chaperone. They emerge, into the crisp night air of Karakura town, the scent of car exhaust and damp asphalt a strange, alien perfume after the sterile reishi of the Soul Society. They stood on the roof of a nondescript apartment building, their spiritual forms invisible to mortal eyes. Below, the city was a vibrant tapestry of electric light and human activity. The Gigai are prepared at the Unohana shop, Rukia said, her voice professional as she tried to assert some measure of control. Kazuki Unohana has been briefed on your arrival. Naruto barely heard her. He closed his eyes, extending his senses. The spiritual energy here was a chaotic, beautiful mess compared to the Soul Society. It was alive, teeming with the faint glow of millions of human souls, the hungry static of low-level hollows, and something else, a profound, gaping wrongness. It's here, he said, his voice low. Multiple scars. It's been active. Unohana's expression grew serious. Where? Naruto pointed east, toward a quieter, more industrial part of the city. There, and there. He pointed south, toward a dense residential area. They feel fresh, like open wounds. He could feel them clearly now. Patches of reality where the background hum of existence had been silenced. They were like holes in a photograph, areas of pure, conceptual nothingness. And as he focused, he felt a flicker. A new one, in the process of being made. There, he said, his eyes snapping open. He pointed toward a deserted park on the edge of the river. It's happening right now. Without another word, he vanished. Not with the precise, controlled flash of Shunpo, but with a blur of pure speed that left the air crackling. Wait, Rukia cried out, startled by his abrupt departure. Unohana was already moving, her own Shunpo a graceful, silent flick. That kept pace with Naruto's raw velocity. Stay here and maintain contact with the Soul Society, Kuchiki-san. This is what we came for. Rukia was left alone on the rooftop, her mouth agape. Her orders were to observe, but her charges had just run headlong into the fire. Naruto and Unohana landed on the branch of a massive tree overlooking the park. Below, the scene was horrifyingly mundane. A young couple, souls who had likely just died in a nearby accident, were huddled together on a park bench, their forms translucent and confused. They were pluses, not yet hollows, just lost spirits. Standing before them was a figure that seemed to drink the light from the air. It was humanoid, but its form was indistinct, like a heat haze or a glitch in reality. It had no face, no features, just a shifting silhouette of what looked like television static. It made no sound. It simply stood there, radiating an aura of profound, soul-chilling emptiness. A harbinger. Is that it? Unohana whispered, her hand resting on the hilt of her blade. Her senses were screaming at her. The being didn't register as living or dead. It registered as incorrect. That's it, Naruto confirmed, his own power beginning to hum, a low, protective thrum. The harbinger raised an arm, its limb stretching and distorting like a corrupted video file. It reached for the two souls. It wasn't an attack, it was a gesture of erasure. The air around the couple began to pixelate, to dissolve. Their spiritual forms flickered, their faint light dimming as their very essence was being unmade. Naruto didn't wait. He dropped from the tree, landing silently between the harbinger and its victims. Unohana was a half-second behind him, a black shadow at his side. The harbinger stopped, its featureless head tilted, as if observing them. It registered their power, their density, their sheer existence. To the creature of the void, they were not threats. They were noise. Loud, offensive, complex noise that had to be silenced. Get back, Naruto told the two frightened souls without looking at them. Run. They scrambled away, their forms flickering with terror. The Harbinger shifted its attention to Naruto and Unohana. It raised both of its glitching arms. Unohana acted first. Hado number 88. Hiryu Gekizoku Shinten Raiho. A colossal blast of pure lightning, a Kido powerful enough to obliterate a skyscraper, erupted from her palm and shot toward the creature. The blast hit it dead on. But there was no explosion. No impact. The lightning simply vanished. It flowed into the Harbinger's form and was negated, its energy unmade as if it had never been cast. Unohana's eyes widened. A Kido of that magnitude, nullified so completely. Naruto was already moving. He formed a Rasengan in his palm, the sphere of swirling reishi, a beacon of concentrated reality. He trusted in its power to overwhelm and destroy. He lunged forward, thrusting the sphere at the creature's chest. The result was even more terrifying. As the Rasengan neared the Harbinger, its edges began to fray. The perfectly contained rotational energy sputtered, the humming sound dying as its power was siphoned away into the void-like nature of the creature. By the time it made contact, the Rasengan had been reduced to a pathetic wisp of energy that dissipated harmlessly against the Harbinger's form. Naruto leapt back, landing beside Unohana, a grim look on his face. It eats energy. Kido. My techniques. It's like pouring water into a black hole. Physical attacks, then, Unohana deduced, her calm never breaking. She drew her Zanpakuto, the blade a sliver of polished moonlight. Her movements were a blur of deadly grace as she appeared behind the Harbinger, her sword slicing through its neck in a perfect, horizontal arc. Her blade passed through it as if through smoke. The creature's form distorted, then reformed instantly, completely unharmed. It hadn't dodged. It simply had no physical substance to be cut. It's not physical, Naruto said, his mind racing. It's not energy. It's a concept, an idea of nothing that's been given a shape. The Harbinger retaliated. It didn't punch or blast. It simply extended its influence. A wave of silent, invisible force washed over them. It was an attack on their minds. Naruto felt a sudden, dizzying vertigo. The memory of his first day at the academy flickered and went out, like a burnt-out film reel. The name of his first sensei, Iruka, became a jumble of meaningless syllables. The sensation was horrifying. It wasn't just forgetting. It was the feeling of the memory itself being scooped out of his history, leaving a cold, smooth blankness behind. He gritted his teeth, his immense spiritual will fighting back. Unohana. Beside him, Unohana stumbled, a hand pressed to her temple. The memory of her first kill, a defining moment in her long life, vanished. The face of the first Shinigami she had healed, a memory she cherished as the start of her penance, dissolved into static. Her own history was being unwritten. This was the true nature of the enemy. It didn't kill you. It erased you, piece by piece, until you were a blank slate, and then it erased the slate. It's attacking our memories, our existence. Unohana gasped, her voice strained. She channeled her Kaido, her healing arts, but not to mend a physical wound. She used its principles of restoration and order to reinforce her own spiritual core. To fortify the structure of her soul against the encroaching emptiness. Her Retsu flared, a green aura of pure life energy pushing back against the conceptual assault. Naruto saw her struggle, saw her solution, and knew he had to do something different. He couldn't just defend. He had to attack. But how do you attack nothing? You don't. You reclaim. He closed his eyes, ignoring the assault on his mind. He let go of his structured techniques, the Rasengan, the clones. He reached deeper, into the very core of what he had become. The Blood Moon Shinigami, a being of balance. He was part existence, part void. He had a foot in both worlds. A deep, resonant hum began to emanate from him. A soft, crimson light, the color of a lunar eclipse, bled from his skin. This wasn't the placid light he had used on the hollow. This was raw, untamed, and primal. It was the power of creation pushing back against uncreation. The crimson aura flared, washing over the park. The grass that had started to gray and wither regained its color. The memories that had been stolen from him slammed back into his mind, vibrant and whole. The void's influence was being actively overridden. The Harbinger, for the first time, reacted. It recoiled, its form flickering violently, as if in pain. The crimson light was anathema to it. The void could unmake existence, but Naruto's power could assert it. It was the ultimate counter. Unohana, now, he yelled. Unohana, her own mind restored by the wave of Naruto's power, understood instantly. The creature was vulnerable, but her blade couldn't touch it, and her Kido was useless. She needed a different approach. She sheathed her Zanpakuto. Her hands began to move, weaving a complex series of gestures. She was not preparing an attack. She was preparing a seal. A binding, not of the body, but of the soul. Or in this case, the lack of one. Bakudo number 99, Part 2, Banken. She intoned, her voice ringing with power. This was one of the ultimate forbidden seals. A technique so powerful it could bind almost anything. The first stage, Shiryu, wrapped the Harbinger in bands of spiritual fabric. The second, Hyakuransen, drove 100 metal shafts into its form, pinning it in place. But the final, most important stage was Banken, the Great Seal. A colossal cube of immense spiritual gravity formed around the creature, crushing it, not with physical force, but with the sheer, absolute pressure of ordered existence. The Harbinger thrashed within the seal. Its form distorted wildly, trying to unmake the Kido construct around it. But the seal was being constantly reinforced by the ambient, crimson aura of Naruto's power. It was being held in place by the very concept of reality. It won't hold it forever, Unohana said, sweat beading on her brow from the immense effort of maintaining such a powerful Kido. It doesn't have to, Naruto said, his voice a low growl. He walked toward the trapped Harbinger, his body glowing with crimson light. He placed his hand on the surface of the Banken seal. My power is balance, he whispered, as much to himself as to the creature. And you are the ultimate imbalance. You are a hole in the world. And it's my job to fill you. He pushed. He didn't inject energy. He didn't attack. He flooded the seal with the purest, most concentrated concept of existence he could muster. He poured in life, memory, emotion, color, sound, pain, joy, the very stuff of reality. He was forcing the void to become a something. The Harbinger shrieked, a soundless, mind-tearing scream of pure agony. Its form, which had been a shifting void, began to solidify. It was being filled, forcibly given substance against its will. The nothing was being turned into a something, and the process was excruciating for it. Its form condensed, solidified, until it was a shard of glittering, black crystal, no bigger than his hand. The Banken seal shattered. The crystal fell to the ground with a soft tink. The oppressive silence was gone. The air was clean. The world felt whole again. Naruto stood panting, the crimson light fading from his body. The effort had been immense, a battle of wills on a metaphysical level. Unohana, equally drained, dismissed the remnants of her Kido and walked over to him. She looked down at the black crystal, her expression a mixture of awe and terror. You gave it a physical form, she said. You forced it to exist. It's the only thing I could think of, Naruto said, wiping a bead of sweat from his brow. Can't erase something that's solid. He knelt and carefully picked up the crystal. It was cold to the touch, and it hummed with a faint, resentful energy. Their first battle against the true enemy was over. They had won, but the victory was terrifying. They had learned the enemy's nature. It attacked the very concept of a person. They learned that conventional Shinigami powers were all but useless. And they had learned that Naruto's unique nature was their only real weapon. As they stood there, catching their breath, a figure landed silently beside them. Sosuke Aizen. He was in his gigai, wearing a simple brown suit, his glasses pushed up on his nose. His expression was one of mild, academic curiosity. Fascinating, he said, his gaze fixed on the black crystal in Naruto's hand. To think such a creature exists. I must confess, I have never seen anything like it. Naruto and Unohana instantly went on guard. How long had he been there? What had he seen? Aizen Taicho, Unohana said, her voice cool and professional. What are you doing here? I grew concerned. Ned, when your spiritual pressures flared so violently, Aizen said with his disarming smile. I took it upon myself to investigate. It seems my concern was warranted. His eyes met Naruto's, and there was no kindness in them, only a cold Calculating intelligence. It appears you are even more special than I thought, Naruto-kun. Not only are you immune to my Kyoka Suigetsu, but you possess the one power in existence capable of combating this. He had seen it all. He knew their secret. He knew their one advantage. The Hogyoku, in which I have a vested interest, seeks to break down the boundaries between Shinigami and Hollow. Aizen continued, his tone conversational, as if they were discussing the weather. It is a tool of evolution, of transcendence. But it cannot rule over a kingdom of nothingness. This enemy, this silence, you speak of, is a threat to my ambitions as well. He had just laid his cards on the table. He admitted his interest in the Hogyoku, his ambition, and positioned himself not as a friend, but as a party with a shared interest in survival. It was a masterful political move. It seems we have a common enemy, Aizen finished, his smile returning. For now, the implication was clear. He would not interfere with their fight against the void. He might even help, if it suited him. But the moment that threat was gone, their truce would be over. Naruto stared at him, then at the black crystal in his hand. He was standing between two apocalypses. The encroaching void that wished to unmake everything, and the smiling man who wished to rule it. His quiet life was well and truly over. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. A Kingdom of Sand and Hollow Souls. The black crystal pulsed with a faint, malevolent light in Naruto's hand. It was cold, inert, yet it felt like holding a caged supernova. Aizen's unexpected appearance had left a bitter taste in the air, a stark reminder that the void was not the only god-level threat they faced. The smiling captain had vanished as silently as he arrived, leaving them with the chilling knowledge that their every move was being watched by a master manipulator. Rukia finally arrived, breathless and wide-eyed, having followed their spiritual pressure signatures. She skidded to a halt, taking in the scene, the lingering scorch marks of Unohana's failed Kido, the disturbed earth, and the two figures standing with an intensity that made the air around them feel heavy. What happened? She demanded, trying to sound authoritative. Captain Commander Yamamoto's orders were to observe. The observation became a little more hands-on than we'd planned, Naruto said dryly, closing his fist around the crystal. We have a sample. Proof. Unohana's gaze was distant, her mind already processing the strategic implications of their battle. The enemy's nature is conceptual. It negates energy and physical attacks. It erodes spiritual beings from existence by attacking their memories, their very history. It can be fought, but why by asserting a stronger reality or by binding it with exceptionally powerful seals? She looked at Naruto. Only your power provides a true counter-offensive. This summary, delivered in her calm, clinical tone, was more terrifying for Rukia than any frantic report could have been. An enemy that eats memories. It was a horror beyond the scope of her training. We must report this to the Soul Society at once, Rukia insisted. No, Naruto and Unohana said in unison. Rukia blinked, taken aback. If we report this now, Naruto explained, his gaze hard, Central 46 will panic. They'll want to quarantine the human world, or worse, purify it. They'll see my ability as a weapon to be controlled, not a solution to be utilized. And Aizen, he let the name hang in the air. He knows. He'll use the chaos to his advantage. We need more information before we play our hand. Unohana nodded in agreement. The harbinger was drawn to this town's high spiritual density. It stands to reason that the place with the highest density of chaotic, powerful souls would be an even greater draw. If these things are a plague, then that is where the infection will be most severe. A dawning horror spread across Rukia's face as she understood. You mean, Hueco Mundo, Naruto finished. The world of the Hollows. A desert kingdom of endless night, populated by monstrous souls locked in a perpetual cycle of consumption. If the void was drawn to spiritual noise, then Hueco Mundo was a death metal concert. That's insane, Rukia protested. A clandestine mission to the human world is one thing, but to infiltrate Hueco Mundo. The captain commander would never sanction it. It's a declaration of war on the Hollows. Which is why we won't be asking for his permission, Unohana stated, her voice leaving no room for argument. The shift from serene healer to pragmatic commander was seamless. This threat transcends the petty politics of Shinigami and Hollow. If Hueco Mundo is being erased, the balance of the three worlds will collapse. It is our duty to investigate. But I'm supposed to observe you. To report back. Rukia stammered, her duty conflicting with the sheer audacity of their plan. Then observe, Naruto said, giving her a surprisingly gentle look. And when we get back, you can report the truth of what you saw. Yamamoto is a soldier. He'll understand a necessary risk taken to gather critical intelligence. The politicians won't, but he will. He was banking on the old warrior's pragmatism over his rigid adherence to rules. Unohana looked at the sky, where the moon of the human world hung, pale and distant. Urahara can open a path for us. It is time we took this hunt to the enemy's preferred feeding ground. Rukia felt a wave of dizziness. In the span of a single night, she had gone from a simple patrol duty to being an accomplice in a covert invasion of an enemy dimension, led by a living paradox and the Soul Society's most enigmatic captain. Her career was either about to end spectacularly, or she was about to become a footnote in a chapter of history no one would ever be allowed to read. With a deep, shuddering breath, she made her choice. I'm coming with you. The Garganta tore open the fabric of the night sky above Hueco Mundo, a screaming black wound against the eternal moonlight. The air that hit them was not air. It was a dense, suffocating medium of stagnant reishi, carrying the scent of sand, bone, and ancient despair. They stepped out onto a dune of white sand, the grains as fine as salt. Before them stretched a desert under a crescent moon that never waxed or waned. The landscape was a desolate vista of alabaster dunes and a forest of crystalline trees that seemed to be made of quartz. In the distance, the colossal fortress of Las Noches, a palace so vast it defied architectural logic, dominated the horizon. But something was terribly wrong. The world was too quiet. Hueco Mundo should have been teeming with the screeches of hunting hollows. The clash of battles for dominance, the low, constant hum of millions of hungry souls. Instead, a profound and unnerving silence hung over the desert. Naruto closed his eyes, his senses expanding. It's worse than I thought. He breathed. He could feel them. Dozens, hundreds of void scars, dotting the landscape like patches of spiritual gangrene. Entire colonies of low-level hollows, which should have been swarming the sands, were simply gone. The desert was pockmarked with nothingness. This is a graveyard, Unohana murmured, her medical sense recoiling from the sheer scale of the spiritual death. But the bodies have been stolen. Rukia shivered, clutching the hilt of her Soda no Shirayuki. The sheer emptiness was more terrifying than any army of monsters. As they stood there, the sand around them began to shift. 3 figures erupted from beneath the dunes, their movements swift and predatory. They were Arankar, their broken mask fragments and white uniforms marking them as elite, Shinigami-like hollows. The leader was a fierce-looking woman with tanned skin, icy blue eyes, and a fragment of a hollow mask covering the lower half of her face. She was flanked by 2 others, one a hulking, muscular male. The other a smaller, lithe figure with a perpetually bored expression. Shinigami, the leader snarled, her voice a low growl. Her spiritual pressure, cold and sharp, washed over them. It was easily at a captain's level. You are a long way from home. Have you come to die? This was Tyr Haribel, the Tres Espada in Aizen's future army, but here and now, she was simply the unofficial queen of this part of the desert, a Vasto Lord-class hollow who had carved out her own domain. Before Rukia could even draw her blade, Naruto stepped forward, holding up his hands in a universal gesture of peace. We're not here to fight. Haribel's eyes narrowed. I have heard that lie before. It is usually followed by a blade. Look around you, Naruto said, his voice calm and reasonable. Your world is dying. It's being eaten from the inside out. We're here to find out what's doing the eating. The hulking Arankar, a powerhouse named Ggio Vega, scoffed. Our world is strong. The weak get eaten. That is the law of Hueco Mundo. This isn't about being eaten, Naruto countered. This is about being erased. Vanished. As if you never existed at all. No pain. No glory. Just gone. He focused his gaze on Haribel, sensing the core of her being. Unlike the mindless hollows, she was driven by a fierce, protective instinct. How many of your own have you lost? Not to other hollows, but to the silence. How many have simply disappeared from your senses, leaving nothing behind? His words struck a nerve. Haribel's cold expression flickered with a hint of uncertainty. She had felt it. The strange disappearances. Patrols that went out and never came back, with no trace of a struggle, no lingering scent of a victor's Retsu. She had assumed it was the work of a new, stealthy predator. But his description, erased, it resonated with the chilling emptiness she felt when she reached out for her missing subordinates. "What are you?" Haribel demanded, her suspicion warring with a nascent curiosity. His spiritual pressure was immense, far greater than any Shinigami she had ever sensed, yet it wasn't aggressive. It was calm, stable, like a great mountain. "We're a solution," Unohana said. Stepping to Naruto's side, her presence was a stark contrast to his, a placid lake that hinted at unfathomable depths. Her captain's Haori marked her as a high-ranking enemy. Yet her tone was that of a diplomat. "The entity responsible for this is a common enemy. It threatens your world as much as it does ours. We believe it is drawn here for the same reason Ashar K is drawn to blood in the water, the concentration of powerful souls." Naruto let a small measure of his true power bleed out, not as a threat, but as a demonstration. The crimson aura, serene and ancient, washed over the dunes. It wasn't the jagged Ryutsu of a Shinigami or the chaotic hunger of a hollow. It was something else entirely, a power that felt as old as the desert itself. Haribel and her Fracken flinched, their instincts screaming at them in the face of this unknown, primal energy. "My name is Naruto Uzumaki," he said. "This is Retsu Unohana. We are not your enemies today. We propose a temporary alliance. A truce. Help us hunt this thing in your lands, and you will be helping to save your own people." It was an unprecedented proposal. A Shinigami captain and a being of unknown origin, standing in the heart of enemy territory, asking for an alliance with one of the most powerful hollows in existence. Haribel was silent for a long time, her icy eyes studying them. Her entire existence was based on the simple creed of predator and prey. Alliances were for the weak. But this was different. The silence was a fear she couldn't fight, a dread that defied the laws of her world. And this man, this Naruto, spoke of it with a certainty that meant he understood it. More, he seemed to have a way to fight it. "Words are sand," Haribel said finally, her voice hard. "They shift with the wind. Show me you are not our enemies." As if on cue, the world glitched. 100 yards away, the air began to pixelate. A patch of the desert, crystalline trees and all, was being erased. And from the center of the growing void scar, another harbinger began to coalesce, its form even larger and more distorted than the one they had faced in Karakura town. Worse, a pack of low-level Ijuka's class hollows, drawn by the commotion, were caught at the edge of the erasure effect. They shrieked in terror as their forms began to flicker and dissolve, their very beings unraveling. "A demonstration," Naruto said grimly. "All right." He didn't move toward the harbinger. He moved toward the dying hollows. He appeared in their midst, a beacon of crimson light. He slammed his palm onto the sand, and his power erupted outwards, not as an attack, but as a wave of pure, assertive reality. "Reclamation," he roared, giving the technique a name. The crimson energy washed over the dissolving hollows. Their flickering forms stabilized, the erasure effect forcibly reversed. The parts of them that had been unmade were rewritten into existence. They were terrified, weakened, but they were whole. He had saved them. Haribel stared, her eyes wide with disbelief. A Shinigami, or whatever he was, had just saved a pack of worthless hollows from certain oblivion. It was an act that flew in the face of everything she knew. The harbinger, its meal interrupted, turned its full attention on Naruto. The silent, mind-eroding wave washed over him. But this time, Naruto was ready. His own crimson aura was a shield of absolute reality, and the conceptual attack washed over him harmlessly. "Unohana," he called out. She was already moving, but this time, she didn't try a direct attack. She drew her Zanpakuto, Minazuki. Its blade long and elegant. She appeared at Naruto's side, her purpose not to attack the harbinger, but to support him. She began to channel her immense Ryutsu, not into Aikido, but into the ambient atmosphere, creating a localized zone of extreme spiritual order. She was reinforcing reality itself, making it harder for the harbinger to gain purchase. Her Kaido, the art of healing and restoration, was being weaponized on a conceptual level. The two of them stood back to back, a perfect fusion of their abilities. Naruto, the agent of reclamation, pushing back the void. Unohana, the agent of order, reinforcing the battlefield. Rukia watched, awestruck. They weren't just fighting together. They were a single, cohesive unit, their powers complementing each other so perfectly it was like they were two halves of the same soul. A shared glance, a subtle shift in posture, a slight modulation in their spiritual pressure, they communicated without words, a dance of divine power and perfect understanding. In the harsh moonlight of Hueco Mundo, watching them fight together was like watching a constellation being born. The fierce, brilliant sun of Naruto's power, orbited and stabilized by the deep gravitational pull of Unohana's. It's learning, Naruto grunted, feeling the harbinger adapt, its erasure effect growing more focused, more intense, trying to find a crack in their defense. Then we must end it quickly, Unohana replied, her voice calm. Naruto gathered his power, his crimson aura condensing around his right arm. This time, he didn't form a Rasengan. He formed a blade, a sword made of pure, solidified reality, glowing with the light of a blood moon. It was an instinctual creation, a weapon to fight a conceptual war. He lunged forward, Unohana matching his movement, guarding his flank. The harbinger lashed out, its form distorting into a dozen razor-sharp tendrils of nothingness. Unohana's blade became a blur, parrying not the tendrils themselves, but the spatial distortions they created, her perfect swordsmanship creating a zone of safety around Naruto. Freed from defending, Naruto thrust his crimson blade into the heart of the harbinger. The impact was silent and absolute. The creature shrieked its soundless scream as the blade of pure existence unraveled its nature from the inside out. It didn't just give it form like the last one, it overloaded it, force-feeding it so much reality that its void nature collapsed entirely. The harbinger imploded, folding in on itself until it vanished with a faint pop, leaving behind nothing. Not even a crystal. Naruto stood panting, the crimson blade dissolving from his arm. The battle was over. The desert was silent once more. He turned to face Haribel. Her mask fragment couldn't hide the shock and awe in her eyes. She had just witnessed a battle that defied all the rules of her world. She had seen power used not for consumption or destruction, but for protection and restoration. "I believe you," she said. Her voice quiet but firm. She sheathed her own blade, a gesture of trust. Her Fracken followed suit, their expressions a mixture of fear and respect. "You are not our enemies. Not today." She looked at Naruto, then at Unohana, seeing the unshakable bond between them. She saw two beings who trusted each other so completely that they functioned as one. It was a kind of strength. She had tried to build with her own Fracken, a strength based on loyalty, not just power. She respected it. "Tell us what you know of the silence," she commanded. "And we will help you hunt. My world will not be erased." A truce had been forged. In the heart of the enemy kingdom, under the pale moonlight of a dead world, Naruto and Unohana had not found a battlefield, but their first true ally. In a war for the survival of all things. And in the process, they had shown each other and the worlds that their partnership was more than just an alliance, it was a new form of power altogether. Chapter 6 End.